I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window as I poured myself a cup of coffee. This house had been my sanctuary for 35 years. Not fancy, but it was mine. Every corner held memories. The doorframe with pencil marks tracking Brian's growth. The small dent in the living room wall from when he crashed his new bike indoors, despite my warnings. I'm Brenda Cook, 62 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew what my life was. I sipped my coffee and gazed at the photos on my refrigerator. My late husband James smiled back at me, frozen in time. A heart attack took him when our son Brian was only 8. The photo beside it showed Brian at his college graduation, tall, handsome, with my eyes and his father's determined chin. After James died, I worked as an accounting secretary for 30 years. I never earned much, but it was enough to raise Brian, pay off this house, and save a modest nest egg for my retirement. I'd been careful with money, a habit formed from years of stretching every dollar as a single mother. A penny saved is a penny earned, James used to say. I lived by those words. I'd retired just last year. After decades of 6 a.m. alarms, I thought I'd finally earned some peace. Some days I volunteered at the community center. Other days I tended my small garden or met with my book club. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine. I was content. Brian had done well for himself. At 34, he'd become a real estate broker with a growing client list. 2 years ago, he married Stephanie, a polished woman who managed a high-end clothing boutique, or so she claimed. Something about her story never quite added up, but I kept my doubts to myself. Brian seemed happy, and that's what mattered. The first time Brian brought Stephanie to meet me, she arrived clutching his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into his sleeve. Her smile was practiced, her clothes expensive. Too expensive for a retail manager, I thought. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she'd said, her eyes quickly scanning my modest living room. I caught the slight curl of her lip as she noticed the worn sofa, the outdated curtains. "Brian talks about you constantly," she added, but her tone suggested these weren't flattering conversations. I tried to warm to her. I really did. I prepared Brian's favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and brought out the good china, the set I'd been saving since my wedding day. "This house has such character," Stephanie remarked, running her finger along the countertop. "How long have you lived here?" 33 years at that point, I told her proudly. "Paid off the mortgage 5 years ago." "Really?" Her eyebrows shot up. "You know, houses in this neighborhood have tripled in value. You must be sitting on quite the nest egg." It wasn't a question about my home. It was an assessment. Still, I smiled and nodded. I wanted to like her. I wanted Brian to be happy. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my kitchen and felt an unfamiliar chill, something in Stephanie's eyes when she looked at me, calculating, assessing, measuring. But surely I was being paranoid. Mothers often struggle with their children's partners. It's natural, I told myself. I was wrong. 6 months into Brian and Stephanie's marriage, the suggestions began. It started small, casual comments dropped during Sunday dinners. "Mom, this house is so big for just one person," Brian would say, glancing at Stephanie. "Don't you get lonely rattling around in here all alone?" "I've lived here most of my adult life, dear. It's just the right size for me." Stephanie would smile tightly. "But the stairs, Brenda. As you get older, they'll become dangerous. Brian and I worry about you falling." I'd been climbing those stairs for decades without issue, but suddenly they were portrayed as a death trap. Then came the financial concerns. "Mom, have you thought about your retirement plan?" Brian asked one evening. "Interest rates are terrible. Your savings could be working harder." Before I could answer, Stephanie chimed in. My uncle is a financial advisor. He specializes in helping seniors protect their assets. The way she emphasized protect made it sound like my money was in imminent danger. What they didn't know was that I'd managed my finances carefully for years. I had my house, no debt, a modest but adequate pension, and savings that would last if I remained frugal. The next red flag appeared when Brian asked to borrow money, $5,000 for what he called an investment opportunity. It was a significant sum for me, but he was my son. I wrote the check. I'll pay you back next month, Mom. Promise. 3 months passed. No repayment, no mention of it. When I gently reminded him, he looked surprised. Oh, right. Things are a little tight right now. Soon, okay? Around this time, the visits became more frequent but shorter. Brian seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. Stephanie did most of the talking, asking increasingly personal questions about my finances. Do you have a will, Brenda? Who's the beneficiary on your accounts? Is this house in a trust? When I'd change the subject, her smile would tighten almost imperceptibly. One evening, I overheard them talking in my driveway as they were leaving. She's not budging, Stephanie hissed. We need to try another approach. Give it time, Brian responded. She trusts me. I stood frozen behind my door, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. What were they planning? This was my son, my little boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with crayon and construction paper. The boy I'd nursed through chicken pox, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about calling my younger brother, William, Bill, as everyone called him. We hadn't spoken in 15 years, not since our explosive argument over our parents' estate. He'd built a successful real estate development company, becoming wealthy while I struggled as a single mother. Our paths diverged, our values clashed, and harsh words were exchanged. Pride kept us apart, even as I occasionally saw his name in business news. I missed him, especially now when I needed someone to talk to, but the chasm seemed too wide to cross. Instead, I called my old friend Margaret from the book club. I think Brian and Stephanie are after my money, I confessed, feeling disloyal even saying it out loud. Margaret's sigh told me she wasn't surprised. Honey, the way Stephanie looks at you, like she's calculating your expiration date. I noticed it at your birthday lunch. But Brian wouldn't. Love can blind people, Brenda, especially men. I wanted to defend my son, but doubt had taken root. The next week, Brian called. His voice had an unusual energy. Mom, we need to talk about something important. Can we come over tomorrow, around 2? Of course, is everything okay? Everything's fine, better than fine. We just want to discuss something with you. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. The next day, Brian and Stephanie arrived precisely at 2. They weren't alone. 3 people in business suits followed them into my living room. Brian introduced them as Marcus Goldman, Patricia Reynolds, and Thomas West, attorneys. My heart sank to my stomach. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. Mom, Brian said, sitting close to me on the sofa, taking my hand. We've been worried about you. Worried? I'm perfectly fine. Stephanie perched on the armchair across from us, legs crossed at the ankles. Brenda, we've noticed some concerning things. Little mistakes with your checkbook, forgetting appointments, the expired food in your refrigerator last month. I stared at her. I wrote down the wrong date for one dental appointment, and that milk was just 1 day past. Mrs. Cook, Marcus Goldman interrupted, his voice professionally sympathetic. These might seem like small things, but they can indicate the beginning of cognitive decline. It happens to many people your age. My age? I'm 62, not 92. Brian squeezed my hand. "Mom, we're not saying there's anything wrong with you. We just want to protect you. These lawyers are here to help us set up some documents for your security." Patricia Reynolds opened her briefcase and laid several documents on my coffee table. "These are standard protective measures, Mrs. Cook. A durable power of attorney so Brian can help manage your finances if needed. A healthcare directive. Some property transfers to protect your assets from potential medical costs." Thomas West nodded. "Many families do this. It's responsible planning." I looked at the stack of papers, then at my son. His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "Brian, what is this really about?" Stephanie answered instead. "Brenda, we care about you. We want to make sure you're taken care of. These are just precautions." I was tired. So tired of their concerned looks and patronizing tones. Tired of feeling like I was defending myself in my own home. But most of all, I was tired of doubting my son. "Can I read through these first? Maybe have my own lawyer look at them?" The three attorneys exchanged glances. Brian's jaw tightened. "Mom, we've already gone through everything. It's standard paperwork. We just need your signature today so we can file everything." "Today? Why the rush?" "The attorneys have tight schedules. They're doing us a favor fitting us in. Please, Mom, trust me." Those last two words, trust me. How many times had I heard them over the years? When he needed money for college textbooks. When he swore the dent in the car wasn't his fault. When he promised to pay back loans. I should have listened to my instincts. I should have insisted on reading every word, on consulting my own attorney. I should have stood my ground. Instead, I signed. Page after page, I signed my name where they pointed. Brian's hand on my shoulder, his reassuring smile, the familiar smell of his aftershave, the same brand his father used to wear. This was my son. Surely he wouldn't hurt me. It was the worst mistake of my life. 2 months later, a certified letter arrived. I opened it to find a court summons. Terms like competency hearing and financial guardianship jumped out at me. My hands shaking, I called Brian immediately. "What is this? Why am I being summoned to court?" "Don't worry, Mom. It's just a formality. Those documents we signed need court approval. I'll handle everything." "But it says, Mom, trust me. Just show up on the 15th. I'll be there. Everything will be fine." But nothing would be fine again. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. I dressed carefully that morning in my best navy dress and the pearl earrings James had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wanted to look competent, alert, not like someone who needed a guardian. I arrived early and sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. Brian had promised to meet me, to explain everything before we went in. At 9:55, 5 minutes before the scheduled hearing, Brian finally appeared, walking from the opposite direction of the entrance. He was already inside, with Stephanie, and the 3 attorneys. They walked as a unit, not toward me, but to the other side of the hallway. "Brian?" My voice sounded small in the cavernous space. He glanced over, nodded slightly, but didn't approach. "The hearing for Cook is about to begin," a court officer announced. We filed into the courtroom. I expected Brian to sit beside me. Instead, he took a seat at the table opposite mine, with Stephanie and the attorneys. I sat alone. The judge, an older man with silver hair and reading glasses, called the court to order. He spoke in legal terms that blurred together in my panicked mind. Words like petitioner and cognitive assessment and fiduciary responsibility washed over me. Marcus Goldman stood and presented documents, the papers I had signed. "Your Honor, Mrs. Cook willingly signed these documents acknowledging her difficulty managing her finances and healthcare decisions. The petitioner, her son Brian Cook, is simply asking the court to formalize the arrangement she already agreed to. That's not what I signed, I blurted out. The judge peered at me over his glasses. Mrs. Cook, you'll have your turn to speak. Patricia Reynolds approached the bench with more papers. We have assessments from 2 physicians noting memory issues and confusion about financial matters. What physicians? I hadn't seen any doctors for evaluation. Thomas West added, Mrs. Cook has made several concerning financial decisions recently, including withdrawing large sums without clear purpose and missing bill payments. None of that was true, not a word. When it was finally my turn to speak, my voice trembled. Your Honor, I don't know what these documents say. I was told they were routine precautions. I've managed my own affairs successfully for decades. I'm not confused or incompetent. The judge looked skeptical. Did you not sign these papers, Mrs. Cook? I signed something, yes, but I wasn't told what they really meant. I thought I was just setting up emergency provisions. Brian wouldn't look at me. Stephanie stared straight ahead, a slight smile on her lips. The judge reviewed the documents again. These signatures appear to be yours and they're witnessed and notarized. But I didn't understand. Mrs. Cook, the judge interrupted. The law presumes that when an adult signs a legal document, they understand what they're signing. Did someone force you to sign these papers? No, but were you under the influence of any medication that would impair your judgment? No, but they didn't explain. The judge made his decision. Based on the documentation before me and the assessments provided, I'm granting temporary financial guardianship to Brian Cook. All financial assets will be transferred to his control. The family home will be placed in a protective trust with Brian Cook as trustee. The room spun around me. This couldn't be happening. You have 2 weeks to vacate the property to allow for necessary modifications for your safety and well-being. The court will revisit this matter in 6 months to assess if permanent guardianship is warranted. The gavel fell with a crack that echoed in my ears. I turned to Brian, desperate to understand. Why? Why would you do this? For the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, empty, a stranger's eyes in my son's face. You don't deserve anything, you selfish old woman, he said quietly, so only I could hear. Dad would be ashamed of how you've wasted everything. Stephanie's small, satisfied smirk made my blood run cold. The attorneys closed their briefcases with synchronized clicks. I sat frozen in my chair as they all filed out, leaving me alone in the courtroom. 2 weeks to leave my home. My savings transferred to Brian's control. My life stolen with the stroke of a pen. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps, disoriented. Where could I go? What could I do? I called Margaret from the book club. I need help, I managed to say through tears. Oh, Brenda, I'm so sorry. We're about to leave for our cruise. 3 weeks in the Mediterranean. Can we talk when I get back? I called 3 other friends. All had reasons they couldn't help. Too busy, not enough room, personal problems of their own. As the sun began to set, I realized a terrible truth. I had nowhere to go. The first night was the hardest. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, too afraid to close my eyes. Every shadow made me jump. Every passing car seemed threatening. By morning, I had made a plan. I would go to legal aid, explain my situation. Surely there were protections against what Brian had done. But legal aid had a 3-week waiting list for appointments. The clerk looked sympathetic but helpless. Do you have anywhere to stay in the meantime? I lied and said yes. Pride is a stubborn thing, even when you're facing homelessness. I returned to my house, still legally mine for 13 more days, and began sorting through my belongings. What could I take? What could fit in my car? What would I need to survive? Brian showed up on the 3rd day. I've hired movers for next week. he announced, walking through the front door without knocking. "They'll put your personal items in storage." "This is still my house," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For another 11 days. He looked around dismissively. "It's an investment property now. Stephanie and I are going to renovate and sell it." "Where am I supposed to go, Brian?" He shrugged. "There are senior apartments or assisted living. You have options." "Options I can't access because you've taken control of my money." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, but quickly replaced by hardness. "You should have thought about that before wasting Dad's life insurance on this dump instead of investing it properly." That night I filled 2 suitcases with clothes, a box with photo albums and James's watch, and my jewelry box with the few valuable pieces I owned. I loaded them into my 12-year-old Honda and drove away from the only real home I'd known as an adult. For 3 days, I moved between different parking lots, trying to sleep in my car. A security guard at the mall asked me to leave. The diner manager became suspicious when I sat nursing a single cup of coffee for hours. On the 4th day, my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. I called the auto club using the last bit of credit on my phone. They jumped the car, but the mechanic gave me bad news. "Your alternator's failing. That'll be about $600 to fix." I had exactly $143 in my wallet. My credit cards, bank accounts, everything else was under Brian's control. That night I parked near a church and cried until I had no tears left. By the 2-week mark, the day I officially became homeless, I had developed a routine. Wake at dawn in my car, use the bathroom at the public library when it opened, spend the day there reading or using their computers to search for help. In the evening, find a new place to park, but routines require resources. My car finally died completely in the parking lot of a strip mall. I couldn't afford to fix it. The little cash I had was dwindling. Soon I would need to choose between food and gasoline. I abandoned the car, taking only what I could carry in a backpack. My world shrank to the contents of that bag. The first night I slept on a bench was the night I truly understood what I had lost. Not just a house, not just money, but safety, dignity, identity. I was Brenda Cook, 62 years old, retired accounting secretary, homeowner, mother. Now I was just another invisible old woman. Days blurred together. I developed new skills, finding public bathrooms, locating free community meals, identifying safe places to sleep. I learned which store managers would look the other way if I warmed myself inside during cold mornings, which coffee shops wouldn't chase me away if I nursed a small drink for hours. My clothes grew dirty. My hair, once carefully colored and styled every 6 weeks, grew out gray at the roots. My hands, once manicured, became rough. I developed a smell, that unmistakable odor of someone without regular access to bathing. People stopped making eye contact. They would look past me, through me, around me, anywhere but at me. I became a ghost in the town where I'd lived for decades. Sometimes I would walk by my old house. Through the windows, I could see workers gutting the kitchen I had saved for years to renovate. The garden I had tended was trampled, my rose bushes uprooted to make way for trendy landscaping. Once I saw Brian's car in the driveway. I hid behind a tree until he left, afraid of what I might do or say if we came face to face. 6 weeks into my homelessness, I discovered a new revenue stream, collecting aluminum cans from recycling bins and trash cans. It was humiliating at first, digging through other people's garbage. But 5 cans meant $1, and $1 could buy bread. I established a route, waking before dawn to beat other collectors to the richest bins. On a good day, I might make $7 or $8, enough for a cheap meal and maybe a cup of coffee at the fast food restaurant where they didn't mind if I used their bathroom to wash up. One evening, I sat on a bench in the central square counting my day's earnings, $4.75. and trying to decide between food or soap. The square was busy with people heading home from work, families with children, couples holding hands, everyone with somewhere to go, someone to see, everyone but me. I closed my eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. How had this happened? How had my life collapsed so completely? I had worked hard, saved carefully, raised my son alone, given him everything I could. And now I was here, invisible, discarded, forgotten. 2 blocks away stood my house, my home, where my son now slept in what had been my bedroom. He drank coffee in my kitchen, watched TV in my living room, enjoyed the comfort I had built over decades of careful work. And I was here, on a bench, counting pennies. A memory surfaced. Brian at 7, skinning his knee in this very park. I had carried him to this same bench, wiped his tears, applied a Band-Aid from the stash I always kept in my purse. "You're the best, Mommy," he'd said, his arms around my neck. What had happened to that little boy? When had he become this man who could leave his mother on the street without a backward glance? The sun was beginning to set when I noticed a man walking directly toward me. He wore a dark, well-tailored suit and carried a leather portfolio under his arm. His purposeful stride set off alarm bells. Was he security coming to chase me from the park? I gathered my meager belongings, ready to flee, but he reached me before I could stand. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Are you Brenda Cook?" I froze. No one had called me by my name in weeks. No one had looked at me as if I were a real person, worthy of direct address. "Who's asking?" My voice sounded rough, unused. He didn't flinch at my appearance or tone. Instead, he extended his hand as if I were a potential client, not a homeless woman on a park bench. "My name is Richard Thompson. I'm an attorney. I've been looking for you for the past 3 weeks. I didn't take his hand. Attorneys had destroyed my life. I wasn't eager to engage with another one. "Whatever you're selling, I can't afford it." He lowered his hand but didn't leave. Instead, he gestured to the bench. "May I sit down?" I shrugged. It wasn't my bench. Richard Thompson sat, maintaining a respectful distance. He placed his portfolio on his lap and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not disgust, something else. Recognition, perhaps. "Mrs. Cook, I understand your skepticism, but I'm not here to take anything from you. Quite the opposite." He opened his portfolio and removed a white envelope. "I have news regarding your brother, William Jenkins." My heart stuttered. "Bill? Is he okay?" Richard's expression softened. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your brother passed away 2 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick." The world tilted sideways. Bill was gone. My little brother. Despite our estrangement, I had always imagined we would reconcile someday. Now that day would never come. "I didn't know," I whispered. "No one told me." "He tried to find you," Richard said gently. "When he received his diagnosis, reconciling with you became his priority. He hired investigators, but by the time they traced you to your home, you were already gone." I closed my eyes, grief washing over me. Another loss in a season of losses. "Mrs. Cook," Richard continued, his voice careful but clear, "your brother changed his will in his final weeks. He left you something." I opened my eyes, certain I had misheard. "Left me something. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. Richard nodded. "Nevertheless, he left you his entire estate, his mansion valued at approximately $3 million, and a cash inheritance of $20 million. The words didn't make sense. The numbers were too large, too impossible. This had to be a cruel joke or a scam. "That's ridiculous. Bill wouldn't—" "He did," Richard interrupted firmly. He handed me the envelope. This explains everything, but there's one condition to the inheritance. A very specific condition you must meet to receive the funds. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper, sealed with wax, so different from the cheap recycled tissues I had been using to wipe my nose. "What condition?" I managed to ask. Richard Thompson leaned forward slightly. "You must live in your brother's mansion for 3 months, 90 days exactly, without leaving. During that time, you must gather and review all the evidence your brother's investigators collected about what your son did to you." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "Your brother wanted you to have the tools to defend yourself," Richard continued, "to reclaim what's yours, to prove the truth in court." "Why?" My voice cracked. "Why would Bill want me to do this? Why not just give me the money?" Richard's gaze was steady. "Because he knew you, Mrs. Cook. He knew you would forgive your son without a second thought. He knew that even after what Brian did, you would still protect him. Your brother wanted to ensure you saw the full truth before you made any decisions." The truth of his words pierced me. Of course I would have forgiven Brian. I already was making excuses for him in my mind. Stephanie's influence, financial pressure, temporary insanity. "And if I refuse? If I don't want to meet this condition?" Richard sighed. "Then the inheritance will go to charity, as specified in the will. You'll receive nothing." I looked down at my dirty clothes, my worn shoes, my ragged nails. I thought about another night on this bench, another day collecting cans, another meal of day-old bread. Then I looked at the envelope in my hands, the last communication from my brother. Inside would be his words, his explanation, perhaps even his forgiveness for our years of silence. "When would this start?" I asked quietly. "Whenever you're ready. Today, if you wish. A car is waiting." I took a deep breath. The evening air filled my lungs, cool and sweet with the scent of nearby flowers. Around me, life continued, people walking, talking, living their normal lives while mine hung in this surreal moment of decision. "What if I can't do it?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if I'm not strong enough to face all this?" Richard's expression softened. "Mrs. Cook, your brother included something else in his instructions to me." He reached into his portfolio again and pulled out another paper. "He asked me to give you this if you hesitated." I took the paper, unfolded it with trembling fingers, and recognized Bill's handwriting immediately, the slanted, confident script I'd know anywhere. "Emily, if you're hesitating, if you're scared, I want you to remember something. You were the strongest person I ever knew. When Dad died, you were 16, and you took care of me like you were my mother. When Mom got sick, you worked during the day and cared for her at night without ever complaining. When your husband died, you got up and carried on for your son. That strength didn't disappear, sister. It's just asleep. It's time to wake it up. Not for revenge, not for hate, but for you. Because you deserve it. Because your own life is worth fighting for. It always was. I love you, Emily. And I'm sorry I never said it when I was alive. Now it's up to you to decide who you want to be. The woman who gives up, or the woman who gets up one more time." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My brother knew me, really knew me, even after all these years. He remembered our shared history, our parents, the girl I had been before life wore me down. And he believed I could still be that girl, that woman, strong, determined, undefeated. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Then I looked at Richard Thompson and made the decision that would change everything. "I accept," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I'll do it." Richard smiled, a genuine relieved smile. "Then let's go, Mrs. Cook. I'll take you to your new home." He helped me to my feet, My legs were unsteady, from hunger, from exhaustion, from the sheer weight of what had just happened. I looked at my bag of collected cans at my feet. "You can leave those," Richard said gently. I shook my head. "No, these remind me of where I came from, of what I survived. I'm keeping them." Richard nodded, respect visible in his eyes. We walked together toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. As I settled into the soft leather seat, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. A crack in the darkness. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the bench that had been my bed, the park that had been my living room, the streets that had been my prison. I didn't know it then, but that decision, to accept my brother's challenge, to face my pain, to reclaim my dignity, would change everything. Not just my circumstances, but me. Modest homes gave way to larger houses with manicured lawns. Then came gated communities with stone entrances and security booths. Richard's phone buzzed. He answered it, speaking in low tones about arrival preparations and security protocols. "Mrs. Cook," he said after hanging up, "there's a change of clothes in that compartment beside you, and some basic toiletries. You might want to freshen up before we arrive." The compartment held neatly folded clothes, simple gray sweatpants, a blue t-shirt, underwear still in its package, and a zip-up hoodie. Beneath them lay a small bag containing a toothbrush, toothpaste, deodorant, and face wipes. I looked down at my filthy clothes, the same outfit I'd worn for nearly 2 weeks. My once navy slacks were now a nondescript gray-brown. My blouse had long ago lost any semblance of crispness. "Where can I change?" "There's a privacy screen," Richard said, pointing to a button on the door. With a press, a dark screen rose between the front and back seats. "We'll take the long way around. Take your time." The simple act of removing my dirty clothes felt like shedding a skin. I used the face wipes to clean myself as best I could, the white cloths turning gray with the grime of the streets. I applied deodorant generously, brushed my teeth with a tiny travel toothbrush, and slipped into the clean clothes. They were too big. I'd lost weight during my weeks on the street, but they were clean. They smelled of laundry detergent, not garbage bins and sweat. I stuffed my old clothes into the plastic bag that had held the cans, suddenly ashamed of them. When I lowered the privacy screen, Richard smiled. "Better?" I nodded, running my fingers through my matted hair. "I must still look terrible." "You look like someone who survived hell," he said simply. "That's not terrible. That's remarkable." The car turned down a private road lined with oak trees. At its end stood wrought iron gates at least 10 feet tall, with an elaborate J worked into the design. The driver entered a code, and the gates swung open silently. We drove through onto a cobblestone driveway that curved through immaculately landscaped grounds. And then I saw it. Bill's mansion rose before us, 3 stories of pale limestone with massive windows reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. A wide staircase led to double front doors of dark carved wood. Fountains played on either side of the driveway, their water catching the golden light. "This is where Bill lived?" My voice was barely a whisper. "For the last 7 years," Richard confirmed. "After his wife Catherine died, he sold their previous home and built this one. He called it his final project." The car stopped at the foot of the stairs. Richard came around to open my door, offering his hand. I took it, my legs unsteady as I emerged. The scale of everything was overwhelming after weeks of trying to make myself small, invisible, taking up as little space as possible on benches and in doorways. "Your brother wanted you to have everything," Richard said as we climbed the stairs. "The house, the grounds, the art collection, the investments, all of it. At the top of the stairs, he handed me a set of keys on a simple silver ring. "These are yours now. Front door, study, bedrooms, wine cellar, everything." The main key was heavy in my palm, solid and real in a way nothing had felt in weeks. I unlocked the front door, my door now, supposedly, and stepped into a soaring foyer with marble floors and a sweeping staircase. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls. Paintings in gilt frames hung at tasteful intervals. "This way," Richard said, leading me past rooms glimpsed through open doorways. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. A living room with leather sofas arranged around a stone fireplace. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. We ascended the staircase to the second floor, walking down a wide hallway until Richard stopped before a heavy oak door. "Your brother's study," he said, "and now yours. This is where you'll find everything you need to understand what happened." He opened the door to reveal a large room dominated by a massive desk of dark wood. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. Another wall held photographs, mostly landscapes, but a few of people. My breath caught as I spotted one, a teenage Bill and me at our high school graduation, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us grinning. I hadn't seen that photo in decades. "The safe is here," Richard said, moving to the far wall where a painting of a mountain landscape hung. He swung it aside to reveal a built-in safe with a digital keypad. "The combination is in this envelope." He handed me a sealed envelope with "safe combination" written on it in Bill's distinctive handwriting. Inside the safe, you'll find everything the investigators gathered. Documents, recordings, photographs, all the evidence about how your son planned and executed the taking of your assets. I took the envelope but didn't open it. The thought of seeing proof of Brian's betrayal made my stomach clench. "When do I have to start?" I asked. "The 90 days begin tomorrow," Richard replied. "You don't have to open the safe tonight. Get some rest. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the master bedroom that should fit you, and everything else you might need." He handed me a business card. "My number is here. Call me anytime, day or night, if you need anything. I'll return the day after tomorrow to see how you're settling in." After Richard left, I stood alone in the vast foyer, the silence enveloping me. After weeks of constant street noise, the quiet was disorienting. I wandered from room to room, afraid to touch anything. Everything was perfect. Museum-quality furnishings, spotless surfaces, precisely arranged decorative objects. Had Bill actually lived here, or just occupied space within this perfection? In the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and marble, I found the refrigerator stocked with prepared meals in labeled containers. Chicken and vegetables, pasta with salmon, beef stew. I heated a container of soup, my hands shaking as I operated the microwave. The smell nearly made me faint with hunger. How long had it been since I'd had a proper hot meal? I ate standing at the counter, too hungry to bother finding the dining room. The soup was rich and flavorful, warming me from the inside. I followed it with bread and cheese, then fruit, luxuries I hadn't tasted in weeks. Upstairs, I found the master bedroom, a massive space with a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linens. The adjoining bathroom was bigger than my entire bedroom in my old house, with a deep soaking tub and a shower with multiple jets. I ran the bath as hot as I could stand it, adding scented bath salts from a crystal jar. As the steam rose around me, I peeled off the borrowed clothes and caught sight of myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman reflected there. Thin, too thin, with prominent collarbones and elbows, gray roots showing in my once carefully maintained brown hair, lines around my eyes and mouth that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. But it was my eyes that shocked me most, haunted, wary, like those of a wild animal expecting a blow. I sank into the bath with a groan that was almost a sob. The hot water enveloped me, soothing aches I'd stopped noticing. I scrubbed every inch of my body, washed my hair 3 times, and still didn't feel clean. When the water cooled, I reluctantly got out, wrapping myself in a plush towel. In the bedroom, I found a dresser filled with new clothes, tags still attached, silk pajamas, cotton underwear, casual slacks and sweaters, all in my size. I slipped on the pajamas, marveling at their softness against my skin. Then I climbed into the massive bed, sinking into its plushness. For the first time in 6 weeks, I slept without fear, without cold, without hunger gnawing at my insides. I slept like a person who had begun to reclaim her humanity. Morning light streamed through tall windows, momentarily disorienting me. The ceiling above was not the underside of a park bench or the roof of my car. It was coffered plaster, painted a soft cream. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd dreamed the entire ordeal, the hearing, the homelessness, Richard finding me. Then I moved, and my body reminded me, muscles sore from sleeping on hard surfaces, bones that ached from inadequate nutrition, skin still raw from yesterday's desperate scrubbing. No, it had all been real. And this palatial room, this soft bed, was also real, though it felt like a dream. I showered again, unable to get enough of the hot water and scented soap. I dressed in clothes from the dresser, soft gray slacks, a blue cashmere sweater, underwear that actually fit. In the bathroom, I found an array of toiletries and cosmetics. I applied moisturizer to my wind-chapped face, ran a comb through my hair, and looked in the mirror. I still didn't recognize myself, but for different reasons. This woman in nice clothes with combed hair bore little resemblance to either the confident homeowner I'd been 2 months ago or the homeless woman of yesterday. She was someone in between, someone new. After breakfast, real coffee, toast with butter and jam, scrambled eggs, I made my way to the study. Gambling debts? Brian had a gambling problem? I opened the financial records folder next. Inside were copies of Brian's credit card statements, bank records, and loan applications. The numbers told a horrifying story. Massive withdrawals from casinos, maxed out credit cards, payday loans with exorbitant interest rates, second mortgage on his house, and then, most damning of all, records of transfers from my accounts after the guardianship was established. My retirement fund, liquidated. My savings account, emptied. The proceeds from the sale of my car. Brian hadn't just taken control of my assets. He'd drained them. The court documents folder held copies of everything I'd signed, with certain clauses highlighted. Hereby relinquish all rights to make financial decisions. Transfer of all property and financial holdings to the guardianship trust. Acknowledgement of cognitive decline and inability to manage affairs. Words I'd never read, never agreed to, yet my signature appeared on every page. There were also medical evaluations from doctors I'd never met, describing symptoms I'd never had. Patient exhibits confusion about financial matters. Memory deficits consistent with early cognitive decline. Recommended full financial guardianship. Forgeries. All of it. My hands shook as I opened the audio recordings folder. Inside was a small digital recorder with dated files. I pressed play on the oldest one. Brian's voice filled the room. She'll sign anything I put in front of her. She trusts me completely. A male voice, one of the attorneys. And if she reads the documents carefully? She won't. Her eyesight isn't great and she hates to admit it. Just use small print. She'll skim it at most. Stephanie's voice next. What about after? When she realizes what happened? By then it'll be too late. All her assets will be in the trust. She won't have the money for a lawyer and no one will believe her anyway. We'll have the medical evaluations backing us up. Another recording dated a week before the hearing. We need to move fast, Brian said, his voice tense. Devon's threatening to break my legs if I don't pay by the end of the month. Who the hell is Devon? Stephanie sounded angry. My bookie. I owe him almost $250,000 now. Jesus Christ, Brian. You said it was $50,000. It grew. That's how debt works. This is insane. We're stealing from your mother to pay your gambling debts? You were fine with it last week. I thought we were talking about selling her house and maybe using some of her savings to invest in our future. Not this. Well, it's too late now. The hearing is in 5 days. Once the judge signs off, we'll have everything. And where is your mother supposed to go? She'll figure something out. She always does. I clicked off the recording, my chest tight with pain. Brian had done this for gambling debts. He'd thrown away our relationship, my security, my dignity, all to pay off a bookie. The photographs folder was the final blow. Images of Brian entering casinos, Brian meeting with a tough-looking man in a parking garage, Devon the bookie, presumably, Brian and the attorneys celebrating with champagne after the hearing, and me, photos of me taken during my first weeks on the street, sleeping on a bench, digging through a recycling bin for cans, standing in line at a soup kitchen. Bill had known. He'd had me followed, seen my degradation, witnessed my fall. And he'd been dying, unable to intervene directly. So he'd created this posthumous rescue, this path to justice. My brother, whom I'd barely spoken to in 15 years, had never stopped caring. I closed the folders and stood by the window, looking out at the immaculate gardens. Grief for Bill washed over me, grief for the reconciliation we'd never have, for the years wasted in stubborn silence. And something else stirred beneath the grief, something hot and sharp that I hadn't allowed myself to feel during those desperate weeks on the street. Anger, not just at Brian and Stephanie, though God knows they deserved it, but at myself for being so trusting, so willfully blind. At the system that had failed to protect me, at a world that could discard an older woman without a second thought. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. Who could that be? Richard wasn't due until tomorrow. I made my way downstairs and peered through the peephole. Brian and Stephanie stood on the doorstep. My heart hammered against my ribs. How had they found me? What did they want? Brian rang the bell again, more insistently. Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. I stood frozen, my hand on the doorknob. After what I'd just learned, I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Mom, we need to talk about Uncle Bill's will. Open the door. So that's how they knew where I was. They'd learned about the inheritance. Stephanie's voice now, honey-sweet but with an edge. Brenda, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. Please open the door so we can talk. Worried? They'd left me on the street without a backwards glance. I'm not opening the door, I called through the wood. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. This is ridiculous. Brian's tone shifted to irritation. That inheritance belongs to family. You haven't spoken to Uncle Bill in years. It's my inheritance, I replied. Bill left it to me legally. He was clearly not of sound mind, Stephanie said. Who leaves everything to an estranged sister? We're contesting the will. Of course they were. I shouldn't have been surprised. Go ahead, I said. The will is ironclad. Now please leave. You think you've won, don't you? Brian's voice turned cold. You think this changes anything? I've already filed with the court. You're still legally incompetent. You can't manage this inheritance or any other assets. As your guardian, I have the right to manage all your financial affairs, including this house and whatever money Uncle Bill left. A chill ran through me. Could he be right? Could he use the guardianship order to take control of this inheritance too? My lawyer disagrees, I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. Now leave or I'll call security. There was a moment of silence, then Brian's voice, low and threatening. This isn't over, Mom. When I'm done, you'll be back on that park bench where you belong. I heard their footsteps retreating, then the slam of car doors and an engine starting. My legs gave way, and I sank to the floor, my back against the door. Brian's threat echoed in my mind. Could he really take this away too? I called Richard immediately. They were here, I said when he answered. Brian and Stephanie. They're contesting the will, and Brian says as my guardian, he has the right to control the inheritance too. Is that true? Stay calm, Mrs. Cook. Richard's voice was steady. We anticipated this. Your brother knew your son would try to contest the will, which is why he took extraordinary measures to ensure it would stand up to any challenge. What measures? The will was witnessed by 3 separate attorneys. Bill underwent extensive medical evaluations before signing it to document his mental competence. And there are specific clauses designed to protect against exactly the kind of legal maneuvers your son is attempting. But what about the guardianship order? Can Brian use that to take control? No. Your brother specifically structured the inheritance as a special testamentary trust that supersedes any existing guardianship arrangements. In essence, the inheritance exists in a legal bubble that your son cannot touch. I exhaled slowly. Thank God. When can you come? I need to understand all of this better. I'll be there in an hour, Richard promised. And I'll bring Alexandra Carter, the attorney I mentioned. She specializes in elder financial abuse cases. After hanging up, I returned to the study, drawn back to the evidence of my son's betrayal. I couldn't stop myself from pressing play on another recording. She's always been pathetic. Stephanie's voice slurred slightly as if she'd been drinking. All those years as a secretary when she could have remarried, found someone with money. Instead, she pinched pennies and lived in that dumpy house. She did it for me. Brian's voice, quieter. She could have had a better life, but she worked that job so I could go to college. And look how that turned out. An education you wasted. At least now her money will finally do some good. What's that supposed to mean? It means I didn't sign up to be married to a failing real estate broker with a gambling addiction. But with your mother's money, we can fix things. Pay off the debts, invest in a business that actually makes money. I'm not a failure. Prove it. Get her to sign those papers. I turned off the recording, a strange hollowness expanding in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal by my son that hurt. It was hearing that his wife viewed him with the same contempt she viewed me. He'd sacrificed our relationship, my security, everything, for a woman who thought he was a failure. As promised, Richard arrived an hour later with Alexandra Carter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and an air of formidable competence. Mrs. Cook, she said, shaking my hand firmly, I've reviewed your case. What happened to you is unfortunately not uncommon, but it is criminal. If you choose to pursue this, we can not only invalidate the guardianship, but potentially bring criminal charges against your son and his co-conspirators. The thought made my stomach clench. Criminal charges. Brian in handcuffs. Brian in prison. I don't know if I want that, I admitted. He's still my son. Alexandra's expression softened slightly. I understand. But what he did was not just wrong, it was illegal. Fraud, exploitation of an elder, theft. And he left you homeless, Mrs. Cook. He left his own mother on the street. I know, I whispered. I lived it. We moved to the study, where I showed them what I'd found in the safe. Alexandra took notes, occasionally asking questions or requesting copies of specific documents. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "More than enough to overturn the guardianship and pursue criminal charges if you decide to go that route. The question is, what you want to do with this information?" It was the question I'd been avoiding since opening the safe. What did I want? Justice, certainly. My freedom and independence restored. My assets returned. But did I want my son punished? Did I want to destroy what remained of our relationship beyond any hope of repair? "I need time to think," I said. Richard nodded. "Take all the time you need. That's why your brother structured the inheritance this way, to give you space and time to process everything before making decisions." Before they left, Alexandra handed me her card. "Call me anytime. And Mrs. Cook, remember that whatever you decide, what happened to you was wrong. Don't let guilt or maternal love cloud that basic truth." After they departed, I wandered through the mansion's many rooms, trying to process everything I'd learned. In a sitting room on the first floor, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before. A collection of framed family photos. My parents on their wedding day. Bill and me as children, building a snowman. Our family at the beach, squinting into the sun. Moments frozen in time from a happier era. And tucked among them, a photo I didn't recognize. Bill and me at his college graduation. I had no memory of the picture being taken, but there we were, smiling, his arm around my shoulders. I must have been about 30, already a single mother, already working the job that would sustain me for the next 3 decades. Behind this photo, I found a folded note in Bill's handwriting. "Emmy, I know you'll find this eventually. I kept all these photos all these years. Even when we weren't speaking, you were still my sister, still family. I hope someday you'll forgive me for my stubborn pride. Love always, Bill." Emmy. No one had called me that since our parents died. It was Bill's childhood name for me, when he couldn't pronounce Brenda properly. Tears filled my eyes. Bill had never stopped caring. He'd preserved our shared past, kept me close in the only way he could. And now, even in death, he was trying to protect me. I returned to the study, drawn back to the safe and its revelations. Behind the folders I'd already examined, I found something unexpected. A small wooden box. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to me in Bill's handwriting, all unsealed. I opened the first one, dated 15 years ago, just after our argument. "Dear Emmy, it's been a week since we said those horrible things to each other. A week since I stormed out, swearing I'd never speak to you again. My anger has cooled now, but my pride is still hot. Why is it so hard to pick up the phone? To say I'm sorry? I was wrong about the house. You were right. Mom and Dad would have wanted us to keep it in the family. I was thinking like a developer, not a son, not a brother. I miss you. I miss our Sunday calls. I miss your laugh. Maybe tomorrow I'll find the courage to send this. Your brother Bill." But he never had sent it, just as he'd never sent the next letter, or the next, or any of the dozens that followed over the years. Each one captured a moment in his life, achievements, regrets, reflections, and each one expressed his continuing love for me despite our estrangement. In a letter dated 5 years ago, he wrote about Brian. "I saw your son today. Not intentionally, we were at the same restaurant. He didn't recognize me, of course, it's been too many years. But I recognized him instantly. He has your eyes. He was with a woman, his wife, I assume. Something about them bothered me. The way she controlled the conversation, the way he deferred to her, the way they both checked their phones more than they looked at each other. I wanted to approach them, to say, 'I'm your uncle. How is your mother?' But what right do I have after all this time? Still, I worry about you, Emmy. I hope he treats you well. I hope he knows how lucky he is to have a mother like you." As I read letter after letter, a clearer picture of my brother emerged. Not the arrogant, money-obsessed man I'd convinced myself he was after our fight, but a complex human being who regretted our estrangement but couldn't overcome his pride to bridge it. The final letter was dated just 3 weeks before his death. "Emmy, the doctors say it's a matter of weeks now. Pancreatic cancer moves quickly, they tell me, as if this is supposed to be a comfort. I've instructed my attorney to find you after I'm gone, to give you everything. I know money can't buy back the years we lost, but it can give you freedom, options, security. I've also had you watched. Not in a creepy way, I hope, but out of concern. My investigators tell me things that keep me awake at night. Your son, his wife, their plans for your house, your savings. By the time you read this, they may have already acted. I'm so sorry I can't stop them directly, that I can't warn you in person, that I waited too long to swallow my damn pride. But I can do this one thing. I can give you the means to fight back. The evidence is all there. Use it wisely. I love you, sister. I always have, even when I was too stubborn to say it. Bill." I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. My brother had tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave. He'd seen what was coming when I was still blind to it. The doorbell rang again, jolting me from my grief. Had Brian returned? I approached the door cautiously and checked the peephole. It wasn't Brian. It was a young woman I didn't recognize, early 20s with long brown hair and a hesitant expression. "Who is it?" I called. "Mrs. Cook? My name is Jessica Thompson. I'm Richard Thompson's daughter. He asked me to bring you some things." I opened the door a crack, chain still engaged. "Do you have ID?" She held up a driver's license. Jessica Thompson, age 24. The photo matched. I removed the chain and opened the door. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, shifting a large basket from one arm to the other. "Dad thought you might need some personal items, clothes and things." She gestured to the basket, which I now saw contained shopping bags. "He said you didn't have much with you." "That's very thoughtful," I said, surprised. "Please, come in." Jessica stepped inside, eyes widening as she took in the foyer. "Wow, this place is amazing." "It's my brother's house," I said automatically, still not quite able to think of it as mine. "Was my brother's house." She followed me to the kitchen where I offered her a drink. As she sipped water, I examined the basket's contents. Toiletries, casual clothes, slippers, a robe, even some basic makeup. "My dad said you might be staying here a while," Jessica explained, "and that you didn't have a chance to pack before coming here." Her careful phrasing suggested Richard had explained my situation, at least partially. "That's right," I said, not elaborating. The shame of my homelessness was still too raw. Jessica's gaze was direct but kind. "Dad also said you might need some company. Not that you have to have visitors, of course, but if you want someone to talk to or need help with anything, I live nearby. I could stop by sometimes." The offer, so simple and genuine, nearly undid me. After weeks of being invisible, of people averting their eyes and quickening their steps to avoid me, this young woman was looking directly at me and offering connection. "I'd like that," I said, my voice rough with emotion. After Jessica left, promising to return in a few days, I took the basket upstairs. As I unpacked its contents, I caught sight of myself in the mirror again. I still looked tired, still too thin, but something had changed in my eyes. The wariness remained, but alongside it was something new. Resolve. I returned to the study and sat at the desk, Bill's desk, now mine, and began organizing all the evidence into a master folder. I made notes, marked important passages, created a timeline of events. By evening, I had a complete picture of what had happened. The planning, the deception, the theft, all of it documented, irrefutable. Now I had to decide what to do with this knowledge. As I sat contemplating my options, my gaze fell on a photo of Bill and me as children, arms around each other, gap-toothed grins aimed at the camera. We'd been inseparable once, allies against the world. "What would you want me to do, Bill?" I whispered to the smiling boy in the photo. The answer came not from the photo, but from my memory of his letters. He'd wanted me to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, to stand up for myself, not for revenge, but for justice. I picked up the phone and called Alexandra Carter. "I'm ready," I said when she answered. "I want to proceed." "With overturning the guardianship?" she asked. "Yes, and I want to confront Brian, officially, legally, with all the evidence. I want him to see what he did, to acknowledge it." "And criminal charges?" I paused. "Let's start with a confrontation. Let me look my son in the eye one more time before I decide whether to send him to prison." "I understand," Alexandra said. "We'll set it up, a formal meeting, here at the mansion, with all parties present." After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of calm. The path forward was clear now. Not easy, but clear. That night I slept without dreaming, the weight of indecision lifted from my shoulders. In the morning, I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my assets, but my dignity, my independence, and my voice. The voice that Brian and Stephanie and those corrupt lawyers had tried to silence. The voice that Bill had believed in, even when I no longer did. The next morning, I awoke with new purpose. After breakfast, I took a walk through the grounds, exploring the gardens Bill had created. In a secluded corner, I found a small stone bench with a bronze plaque. "For Brenda, the sister who taught me strength. One day I'll bring you here. One day we'll reconcile. Until then, this space holds your place in my heart." I sat on the bench, tears streaming down my face. Bill had created this spot for me years ago, hoping for a reconciliation that never came. Now I was here, but he was gone. "I'm sorry, Bill," I whispered to the empty garden. "I should have reached out. I should have been braver." The gentle breeze rustled the nearby rose bushes, and in that moment, I felt a curious peace. Bill had forgiven me. He'd shown that in the most tangible way possible, by trusting me with his legacy, by giving me the tools to reclaim my life. Now it was up to me to prove worthy of that trust. I returned to the house and called Richard. "I want to set up the meeting with Brian as soon as possible," I told him. "I'm done waiting." "Alexandra is drafting the formal invitation now," he replied. "We'll request their presence here 3 days from now for an official disclosure of evidence and settlement discussion." "Will they come?" "When they receive the packet Alexandra is preparing, just a small sample of what we have, they'll come, if only to see what else we know." The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Alexandra arrived with a notary public and a court reporter. Richard brought in a financial forensic specialist to document exactly what had been taken from me. Jessica visited daily, bringing food, companionship, and a refreshing normality to our conversations. She never pressed for details about my situation, but her presence was a reminder that not everyone in the world was cruel or calculating. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I paced the mansion's hallways, rehearsing what I would say to Brian. How could I make him understand the magnitude of his betrayal? How could I reach the son I'd raised if he still existed beneath the man who'd abandoned me? Around 3 a.m., I found myself in Bill's study, my study now, staring at the evidence folders. I picked up one of the recordings and played it again. "She's always been there for me," Brian's voice. quieter than in other recordings. When Dad died, she worked 2 jobs so I wouldn't feel the difference. She never remarried because she said I was enough family for her. That's noble, one of the lawyers responded, his tone suggesting it was anything but. But the fact remains, she's sitting on assets that could solve your problems. Assets you'll inherit eventually anyway. I know. I wish there was another way. There isn't. Not unless you can magic up $200,000 to pay your gambling debts. A long pause, then Brian's voice resigned. When do we do this? There it was. The moment my son chose his debts over me. The moment he decided I was a problem to be solved rather than a mother to be cherished. Yet in his hesitation, I heard a flicker of the son I knew. He'd had doubts. Second thoughts. He wasn't a monster. He was a weak man who'd made a terrible choice. Could that man be reached? Redeemed? I wasn't sure. But I had to try. Not just for his sake, but for mine. I needed to understand how my son, the little boy I'd loved more than life itself, could have become the man who left me on the street. At dawn, I showered and dressed carefully in clothes Jessica had brought. A simple navy dress, low-heeled shoes, a pearl necklace that had been my mother's. I wanted to look like myself again, the self that existed before the hearing, before the homelessness, before the betrayal. Alexandra arrived early, bringing additional documentation and reviewing our strategy. Remember, she advised, stay calm. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't get drawn into emotional arguments. Richard came next with the notary and court reporter. They set up in the dining room, arranging the large table like a conference room, with evidence folders at each place. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and went to open the door. Brian stood on the doorstep, Stephanie beside him. Behind them were 2 men I didn't recognize. They're lawyers, presumably. My son looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He'd lost weight. His normally impeccable clothes seemed rumpled, as if he'd slept in them. Stephanie, by contrast, looked immaculate as always. Designer suit, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. But her eyes darted nervously, and her smile seemed forced. "Mom," Brian said, his voice hoarse. "You look different." Different from what? The last time he'd seen me, I'd been sleeping on a park bench in filthy clothes. "Come in," I said, not returning his greeting. "Everyone's waiting in the dining room." They followed me silently. When we entered the dining room, Alexandra and Richard stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Cook," Alexandra said formally. "Thank you for coming. I'm Alexandra Carter, representing Brenda Cook. This is Richard Thompson, executor of William Jenkins's estate. The notary and court reporter are here to document today's proceedings." Brian's lawyer stepped forward. "I'm David Mitchell, representing Brian and Stephanie Cook. This is my associate, Jeffrey Palmer. We've agreed to this meeting with the understanding that it's an informal discussion, not a deposition." "That's correct," Alexandra confirmed. "However, everything said today will be recorded and may be used in future legal proceedings." We took our seats, me on one side of the table with Richard and Alexandra, Brian and Stephanie on the other with their lawyers. Alexandra began by placing a folder in front of Brian. "These are copies of documents we've gathered concerning your actions against your mother. They include evidence of fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and conspiracy." Brian didn't open the folder. His gaze remained fixed on me. "Mom," he said quietly, "what is this about?" For the first time since they arrived, I looked directly into my son's eyes. "It's about the truth, Brian. About what you did to me, what you took from me." My voice remained steady. "It's about the fact that you left me,
Your mother, homeless while you lived in my house and spent my money. Stephanie interjected. Brenda, you're confused. The court determined. I'm not confused, I cut her off. I know exactly what happened. I have the recordings, Brian. I have the photographs.
I have every piece of evidence showing how you planned this, executed it, and celebrated afterward. Alexandra pressed play on a recorder. Brian's voice filled the room. She'll sign anything I put in front of her. She trusts me completely. The color drained from Brian's face. Where did you get that? He whispered. Your Uncle Bill hired investigators to watch you, I explained. He knew what you were planning. He collected evidence for months. That's illegal, David Mitchell protested. Recorded without consent. One-party consent state, Alexandra interrupted smoothly. The investigators were legally permitted to record, but if you prefer different evidence... She opened another folder and spread photographs across the table. Brian meeting with the attorneys. Brian at casinos. Brian with a man identified in the attached report as Devin Reeves, a known bookie with a record of assault charges. These were all taken legally in public places, Alexandra noted. As were these. She placed another set of photos on the table. Me, sleeping on a bench, digging through recycling bins, standing in line at a soup kitchen. Your mother, after you took everything from her, Alexandra said, her voice hard. This is what you reduced her to. Brian stared at the photos, his face ashen. I didn't. I never thought. What? That I'd end up on the street? The calm I'd maintained began to crack. Where did you think I would go, Brian? Who did you think would take me in? You took my house, my car, my money, everything. You were supposed to go to Aunt Linda's, he said weakly, or one of your friends. Someone was supposed to help you. I called everyone, I said. No one helped. No one. I slept on park benches. I ate from garbage cans. I collected aluminum cans to buy food. For 6 weeks, Brian. 6 weeks while you lived in my house. Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected her. You didn't care. Oh, as long as you got what you wanted. Alexandra took over, her tone professional again. Mrs. Cook has decided to take legal action to overturn the guardianship order. Given the evidence we've presented, and the much more extensive documentation we're prepared to submit to the court, we expect to succeed without difficulty. Brian's lawyer leaned over to whisper in his ear. Brian nodded slightly, then looked at me. What do you want from us, Mom? The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Certainly not what they feared, not revenge or destruction. I want justice, I said finally. I want my house back, my savings, my independence. I want the guardianship overturned. And I want you to admit what you did, to acknowledge that you deceived me, stole from me, and abandoned me. And if I do all that, then what? Criminal charges? Prison? I looked at my son, really looked at him. The fear in his eyes, the desperation, the shadow of the little boy he'd once been. That depends on you, I said, on whether you're truly sorry, on whether you're willing to make amends, not just legally, but personally. I can't undo what happened, Brian said, his voice breaking. No, you can't, but you can choose what happens next. The confrontation left me emotionally drained. After Brian and Stephanie left with their lawyers, I retreated to the sunroom, staring out at the immaculate gardens without really seeing them. Alexandra and Richard followed, concern evident in their expressions. You did incredibly well, Alexandra said, sitting beside me. Maintaining that level of composure couldn't have been easy. I nodded, still processing the meeting. Brian's face when he saw those photographs of me on the street, the shock seemed genuine. But was it shock at what he'd done? or merely surprise at being caught? "What happens now?" I asked. Richard exchanged glances with Alexandra. "Brian's lawyers have requested a private meeting. Just you and Brian, no attorneys. They say he wants to speak with you alone before responding to our demands." My pulse quickened. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. We advised against it, but ultimately it's your decision. A private meeting, just mother and son. Part of me yearned for it, a chance to speak freely, to ask the questions that burned inside me. Another part feared it, feared manipulation, more lies, or simply the pain of facing my son knowing what he'd done. "I'll do it," I said finally, "but I want you both nearby, just in case." That evening, I paced the mansion restlessly. In the library, I found a collection of family law books that had belonged to Bill. One volume was bookmarked, a passage highlighted. "Exploitation of family bonds for financial gain represents one of the most profound breaches of trust in our legal system. It transcends mere theft. It is the destruction of the very foundation upon which healthy families are built." Bill had understood. Even before he knew about Brian's plans, he'd recognized the devastating nature of family betrayal. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Brian as a child, his first steps across our living room floor, arms outstretched toward me, his gap-toothed grin when he lost his front teeth, the pride in his eyes when he received his college acceptance letter. Where had that boy gone? Could any part of him still exist in the man who had left me homeless? Morning arrived with a pale, watery sunlight filtering through the curtains. I dressed carefully in clothes Jessica had brought. Simple black slacks, a blue blouse, low heels. I wanted to look like myself, not the wealthy heiress Brian might now perceive me to be. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Richard answered it, escorting Brian to the sunroom where I waited. Then he and Alexandra retreated to the study, close enough to hear if I called, but giving us privacy. Brian stood awkwardly in the doorway. He looked worse than yesterday, the shadows under his eyes darker, his normally neat appearance disheveled. He carried a manila envelope. "Mom," he said, his voice rough, "thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Sit down, Brian." He did, placing the envelope on the table between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed unnaturally loud. "I don't know where to begin," he finally said. "The truth would be a good start." Brian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. It was what he'd always done when stressed, even as a boy. "The truth," he repeated almost to himself. "Okay, the truth is I owed money, a lot of money, gambling debts. I know that from the recordings." He flinched. "Right, the investigators." He took a deep breath. "It started small, just poker games with clients, betting on football. But I kept losing, and to keep playing I borrowed money. By the time I realized how deep I was in, I owed almost $200,000 to some very dangerous people. So you decided to steal from me instead of asking for help." "I was ashamed," he whispered. "How could I tell you? You who sacrificed everything for me, who managed money so carefully your whole life, that I'd thrown away thousands on stupid bets, that I'd put our home, my marriage, everything at risk. So instead you took everything I had and left me on the street." Brian's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought. I truly believed you would stay with friends, or at Aunt Linda's. I told myself you'd be fine, that you always figured things out. When the judge ordered the guardianship, I convinced myself it was for your own good, that I was protecting you from yourself." "Protecting me?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "By making me homeless? By taking the home I spent 30 years paying for?" "I was desperate," he admitted. "Delusion is the wrong word because I knew what I was doing was wrong.
But I created this fiction where it would all work out somehow, where I'd pay off the debts, straighten everything out, and then, I don't know, make it up to you somehow. He shook his head. It sounds insane now, but at the time, with Devin threatening to break my legs, with Stephanie talking about divorce, with the bank about to foreclose on our house, you chose yourself over me. Yes, he whispered. God help me, I did. The raw honesty of his admission stunned me. I'd expected excuses, justifications, maybe even more manipulation, not this stark confession. And Stephanie's role in all this? Brian's expression hardened slightly. The gambling was my fault. The plan to take your assets was hers. She found the lawyers. She orchestrated everything. But you went along with it. I did. I can't blame her. I made the choice. I signed the papers. I lied to you. He gestured to the envelope. These are copies of everything. The debt records, the communications with the lawyers, bank statements showing where your money went, transcripts of the forged medical evaluations, everything. I stared at the envelope, not touching it. Why are you giving me this? Because you deserve to know exactly what happened. And because... He swallowed hard. Because I want to make it right. As much as I can. How? You can't undo what you did. You can't give me back those 6 weeks on the street. No, I can't. He met my eyes directly for the first time. But I can confess to everything. Sign a statement admitting what I did. Return your house and whatever money is left. Accept whatever legal consequences come. Even prison? Brian paled but nodded. If that's what happens, yes, I deserve it. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of deception. I saw exhaustion, fear, shame, but also a resolve that seemed genuine. What about Stephanie? A flicker of pain crossed his features. She left last night. Said she didn't sign up for a husband who was going to prison. Took most of the jewelry she bought with your money. I wasn't surprised. Stephanie had always been about self-interest. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my son to suffer more pain. Don't be. It's been over for a while. He hesitated. Mom, there's something else you should know. After yesterday, after seeing those photos of you, I went to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting last night. It's not much, just a first step, but I'm going to get help. Whether you press charges or not, whether I go to jail or not, I'm going to fix this part of myself. The words settled between us, weighted with promise and uncertainty. I wanted to believe him. After everything, I still wanted to believe in my son. I need time to think about all this, I said finally, to decide what I want to do. I understand. Brian stood to leave. For what it's worth, I am sorry. More sorry than I can ever express. What I did was unforgivable. I know that. As he walked to the door, he paused. Uncle Bill, did he suffer? At the end? The question surprised me. I don't know. I didn't get to see him before he died. Brian nodded sadly. I met him once, about a year ago. He came to an open house I was hosting. He didn't introduce himself as your brother, just as a potential buyer. We talked for almost an hour. He asked about you, casually, as if making conversation. I didn't realize who he was until I saw his name on the sign-in sheet after he left. This was new information. Bill had sought out Brian? Spoken with him? Did he say anything else? He said I looked like my father, and that I was lucky to have you as my mother. Brian's voice broke. I think he was checking on you through me, making sure you were okay. After Brian left, I sat for a long time, turning over everything he'd said. The confession, the apology, the promise to make amends, the meeting with Bill that neither of them had ever mentioned to me.
Richard and Alexandra joined me, waiting patiently while I gathered my thoughts. "What do you think?" Alexandra asked finally. "Was he sincere?" "I think so," I said slowly. "But I've been wrong about him before." "The offer to confess and return your assets is significant," Richard noted. "It would make overturning the guardianship much simpler." "And criminal charges?" Alexandra sighed. "That remains your decision. With his confession, conviction would be virtually certain. But given what he's offered, we could potentially negotiate a plea deal, restitution, probation, community service, possibly avoid prison time." I thought about Brian in prison, my son, despite everything, locked in a cell. The image made me physically ill, but I also thought about justice, about consequences, about the message it would send if he faced no real penalty for what he'd done. I need to speak with him again, I decided, once I've had time to review everything he's given me, once I'm certain of what I want. Later that evening, Jessica came by with dinner, homemade lasagna and garlic bread that filled the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. "You look troubled," she observed as we ate. "Is it about your son?" I'd shared some details of my situation with her over the past days, finding her an unexpectedly good listener. "He's offered to confess everything, to try to make amends," I explained. "But I don't know if I can trust him, if I should." Jessica considered this. "My mom used to say that people can change, but only when they've truly faced themselves. When they've seen the worst of who they are and decided to be better." "Has your son faced himself, do you think?" I thought of Brian's haunted eyes, his broken confession. Maybe, for the first time. Then perhaps that's your answer. The next morning I opened the envelope Brian had left. True to his word, it contained everything. Complete documentation of his gambling debts, communications with the lawyers, bank records showing the flow of my money, a statement he'd already signed confessing to fraud and elder abuse, documents prepared to return my house to my name. The evidence was damning, but also revelatory. I could trace the progression of his desperation through the records, growing debts, increasingly threatening messages from creditors, the slow collapse of his financial life. Understanding didn't excuse what he'd done, but it provided context. My son hadn't woken up one morning and decided to betray me. He'd descended gradually into a pit of his own making, then grasped at any escape, no matter how reprehensible. I called Alexandra and had asked her to arrange another meeting, not just with Brian, but with everyone involved in the original fraud. Stephanie, the 3 attorneys, even the doctors who had provided false evaluations. "Are you sure?" Alexandra asked. "It might be better to deal with them separately." "I'm sure. I want them all there. I want everyone to hear everything." 2 days later, we gathered in the mansion's formal dining room. The table had been arranged with evidence folders at each place. A court reporter sat in the corner, fingers poised over her stenotype machine. Brian arrived alone. Stephanie came with her own attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit. The 3 lawyers who had orchestrated the guardianship looked distinctly uncomfortable. The 2 doctors who had falsified my evaluations appeared nervous, as well they should. Their medical licenses were at stake. I sat at the head of the table, Richard and Alexandra flanking me. I wore a simple but elegant navy dress, clothes befitting the woman I had been, and was becoming again, not the homeless person they had reduced me to. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I've asked you here because each of you played a role in what happened to me. Each of you contributed to the fraud that stripped me of my home, my assets, and my dignity." I looked at each face in turn. Brian, pale but composed. Stephanie, defiant. The lawyers, professionally blank. The doctors, visibly anxious. "I have gathered comprehensive evidence of what you did," I continued, gesturing to the folders. Evidence sufficient for criminal prosecution of every person at this table. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Stephanie's attorney leaned forward. Mrs. Cook, if this is some kind of intimidation tactic, it's not a tactic, Alexandra interrupted smoothly. It's a statement of fact. We have recordings, documents, bank records, photographic evidence, everything necessary to prove conspiracy, fraud, financial elder abuse, and malpractice. Then why are we here instead of in court? One of the lawyers challenged. I met his gaze. Because I'm giving you a choice. I opened a folder and removed a document. This is a settlement agreement drafted by my attorneys. It stipulates the following. First, immediate dissolution of the guardianship. Second, return of all my assets, my house, my bank accounts, my personal property. Third, financial restitution for losses incurred during my period of homelessness. I turned to the doctors. For you, it means surrendering your medical licenses voluntarily rather than having them revoked through disciplinary proceedings. To the lawyers, for you, it means similar voluntary surrender of your law licenses, plus financial restitution. To Stephanie, for you, it means returning any assets purchased with my money and signing a non-disclosure agreement about these events. Finally, to Brian, for you, it means fulfilling the confession and restitution you've already offered, plus 500 hours of community service with organizations serving the homeless. I placed the document in the center of the table. Sign this agreement, comply with its terms, and I will not press criminal charges. Refuse, and we proceed to court, both criminal and civil. The room erupted in whispered conferences between clients and attorneys. Stephanie's lawyer shook her head vehemently. One of the doctors appeared on the verge of tears. Brian spoke first. I'll sign. His simple declaration silenced the room. Brian, Stephanie hissed, you can't be serious. They're bluffing. They'd never take this to trial. It would be too messy, too public. I'm done hiding, Brian replied. I'm done lying. I did this and I'll accept the consequences. His words seemed to ripple through the room, shifting the calculus for everyone else. One by one they capitulated, first the doctors, then the lawyers, and finally, seeing herself isolated, Stephanie. The signing took over an hour, each party reviewing the terms with their counsel, initialing every page, signing with varying degrees of reluctance. When it was done, when the notary had stamped the final signature, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not joy, not triumph, simply the closing of a chapter that had nearly destroyed me. As the others filed out, Brian lingered. What now, Mom? He asked quietly. Now we both try to rebuild, I replied. You with your life, me with mine. Will I ever see you again? The question hung between us, weighted with all that had happened. I don't know, Brian. I need time. What you did, it can't be undone with a signature or an apology. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. For what it's worth, I'm starting therapy tomorrow. Real therapy, not just GA meetings. I want to understand why I did this, why I could do this to the person who gave me everything. I hope you find answers, I said, and meant it. After everyone had gone, I stood at the window watching their cars disappear down the long driveway. A weight had lifted. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough that I could breathe more freely. You did well, Richard said, joining me at the window. Better than well. You were magnificent. Not magnificent, I corrected him. Just clear. For the first time in months, I'm clear about what I want, what I need. What I needed, I realized, was not revenge, not punishment, simply restoration of my assets, yes, but more importantly of my sense of self, my dignity, my place in the world.
That evening, Alexandra called with news. The judge had approved our emergency motion to dissolve the guardianship.
I was legally myself again, in control of my own life, my own decisions, my own future. I celebrated with a quiet dinner in the garden, sitting on the bench Bill had dedicated to me years before. The air was sweet with the scent of roses. Somewhere nearby, a mockingbird sang its evening repertoire. "I wish you were here," I said aloud to my brother. "I wish we'd had the chance to sit here together, to heal the rift between us." The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, as if in response. The settlement agreement set numerous wheels in motion. Within a week, my house was legally mine again. My bank accounts were restored with interest. My personal possessions, those that hadn't been sold or discarded, were returned. I visited the house once, walking through rooms that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. Brian and Stephanie had begun renovations before my inheritance changed everything. Walls demolished, fixtures removed, my garden uprooted. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a house, a structure that held memories, but no longer held my future. I listed it with a realtor, not Brian, and received 3 offers within days, all well above asking price. The housing market had indeed risen dramatically since I'd paid off the mortgage. Meanwhile, I settled into life at the mansion. It was far too large for one person, but certain spaces became mine. The sunroom where I read each morning, the kitchen where I rediscovered my love of baking, the garden bench that felt like a connection to Bill. Jessica visited regularly, sometimes bringing her father. Richard had evolved from legal representative to friend, his steady presence a comfort as I navigated this new chapter of my life. "Have you thought about what you'll do now?" he asked one evening as we shared dinner on the terrace. "With your brother's inheritance, you could do anything. Travel, start a business, support causes you care about." I considered his question. During my weeks on the street, I developed a heightened awareness of how invisible older women become when they lack economic power, how easily they can slip through society's cracks. "I think I want to help others who've been through similar experiences," I said slowly. "Women who've been financially exploited or left without resources. There must be many who don't have a wealthy brother to rescue them." Richard nodded encouragingly. "There are. The problem is widespread and growing." "Then that's what I'll do," I decided. "Create some kind of organization that provides emergency housing, legal assistance, financial counseling, whatever is needed to help women regain their independence." The idea took root and began to grow. I researched existing organizations, identified gaps in services, consulted with experts in elder law and social work. Alexandra introduced me to other attorneys specializing in elder abuse cases. A structure began to emerge, a foundation that would provide comprehensive support to older women facing financial exploitation or homelessness. I named it Second Chance and funded it initially with $5 million from Bill's inheritance. With Richard's guidance, I established a board of directors, hired staff, and purchased a small apartment building to provide transitional housing. 3 months after the confrontation with Brian, Second Chance welcomed its first resident, Eleanor Davis, a 70-year-old woman whose daughter had manipulated her into signing over her house. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Eleanor confided as I showed her the apartment. "I have 2 master's degrees. I was a school principal for 20 years. How could I have been so blind?" "Intelligence doesn't immunize us from betrayal by those we love," I told her. "Trust makes us vulnerable, and that's not a failing. It's a fundamental part of being human." Over the next few months, more women came to Second Chance. Martha Wilson, 68, financially drained by her son-in-law. Helen Garcia, 75, whose nephew had stolen her life savings. Rose Thompson, 63, whose husband had left her destitute after 40 years of marriage. Each woman arrived broken in some way, financially, emotionally, spiritually. Each began the slow process of rebuilding her life with dignity and support. I found purpose in this work, a meaning that transcended my own experience. My suffering hadn't happened for a reason, but I could create reason from it, forge something constructive from the wreckage. During this time, Brian and I maintained a careful, limited contact. He sent monthly emails updating me on his therapy, his GA meetings, his community service hours at a downtown homeless shelter. I responded briefly, acknowledging his progress but maintaining emotional distance. Stephanie divorced him, as expected. The lawyers surrendered their licenses rather than face disciplinary proceedings. The doctors did the same. The system that had failed me was, in some small way, corrected through their professional deaths. 6 months after my confrontation with Brian, Jessica helped me organize an open house for Second Chance, a celebration of the Foundation's early successes and an opportunity to raise additional funds and awareness. The mansion's grand reception rooms, so long unused, filled with supporters, donors, volunteers, and most importantly, the women who had found new beginnings through the Foundation. I stood at the foot of the grand staircase, preparing to address the gathering, when I spotted a familiar figure slipping in through the front door. Brian. He stood awkwardly at the back of the crowd, uncertain of his welcome. He looked different, healthier, more centered, his expression open rather than guarded. Our eyes met across the room. He nodded slightly, a question in the gesture. I hesitated, then nodded back, granting permission for him to stay. I stepped forward to address the room. Thank you all for coming tonight. 6 months ago, Second Chance was just an idea born from my own experience with homelessness and financial exploitation. I shared the Foundation's mission, introduced some of the women who had been helped, outlined plans for expansion. Throughout, I was acutely aware of Brian at the back of the room, listening intently. After the formal presentation, as guests mingled and explored the Foundation's displays, Brian approached cautiously. "This is amazing, Mom," he said quietly. "What you've created here." "Thank you." I studied him, noting the changes. Clear eyes, steady hands, a calmness that hadn't been there before. "I'm not sure if I should have come," he admitted. "But when Jessica mentioned the open house, I wanted to see what you've accomplished." "Jessica invited you?" He nodded. We've been talking occasionally. She's been kind, keeping me updated on how you're doing." I wasn't sure how I felt about that, but it explained some of Jessica's careful questions about my feelings toward Brian in recent weeks. "How are you?" I asked, the question feeling simultaneously trivial and enormous. "Better. 6 months sober from gambling. The therapy is helping. It's brutal sometimes, facing who I've been, but necessary." He hesitated. "I got a new job. Nothing fancy, just an assistant at a real estate office across town. Starting over." "And your community service?" "Completed 400 of the 500 hours. I'm actually continuing beyond the requirement. It's changed me, working with people who have so little, hearing their stories." An awkward silence fell between us. So much history, so much pain. How could we navigate it in this crowded room amid the celebration of something built from my darkest days? "I should go," Brian said finally. "I just wanted to see this, to see you, to tell you I'm proud of what you've done." As he turned to leave, I surprised myself. "Would you like to come by sometime? For coffee, maybe?" The invitation was spontaneous, unplanned, perhaps unwise. Yet it felt like a necessary step, not toward forgiveness, which remained distant and uncertain, but toward something else. Understanding, perhaps. Brian's eyes widened. I'd like that. Very much. Not yet, I clarified. But soon. I'll call you. He nodded, a cautious hope in his expression. Thank you, Mom. After he left, Richard found me by the terrace doors. Was that Brian? Yes. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. I think so. I'm not ready to forgive him fully. Maybe I never will be. But I'm ready to try understanding him better. Richard squeezed my hand gently. That's remarkably gracious. Not gracious, I corrected him. Necessary. For me, not for him. I don't want to carry this anger forever. It's too heavy. The open house continued around us. Laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, the buzzing energy of something positive taking root and growing. From the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful was emerging. Not perfect, not unmarked by what had happened, but alive and meaningful and mine. 2 weeks after the open house, I received an unexpected call from Richard. There's something you need to see, he said. Something your brother left for you that wasn't in the original inheritance. It was set to be revealed only after 6 months. What is it? A safe deposit box at First National Bank. The instructions were specific. You were to be notified of its existence only after successfully reclaiming your assets and establishing your new life. Curiosity piqued, I met Richard at the bank later that day. The manager escorted us to the vault, where Richard produced a key. This was in a sealed envelope in my files, with instructions to give it to you at the 6-month mark. The safe deposit box contained a single item, an envelope with Bill's handwriting, for Emmy, when she's found her strength again. Inside was another key and a handwritten note. Emmy, if you're reading this, it means you've done it. You fought back. You've reclaimed what was yours. You've begun to build something new from the wreckage. I'm sorry I won't see it. I'm sorry for all the years we lost to pride and stubbornness. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you directly from what Brian did. But I'm not sorry for believing in your strength, even when you'd forgotten it existed. This key opens the boathouse at Morrison Lake. The property isn't listed in my official holdings. It's owned by a separate trust I established years ago. I've transferred ownership to you privately, outside the main inheritance. It was meant to be our reconciliation place, where we would finally talk, finally heal the rift between us. I bought it the year after our fight, always intending to invite you there, always finding reasons to wait just a little longer. Now it's yours, a sanctuary, a place no one knows about, a place just for you. I love you, sister. I always did. Bill. I read the letter twice, tears blurring my vision. A lake house. A secret place Bill had bought for our eventual reconciliation. A reconciliation that never happened. Do you know where this is? I asked Richard. Yes, about 2 hours north. Beautiful property on a private cove. Very secluded. Will you take me there? The next morning, Richard drove me through rolling countryside, eventually turning onto a narrow lane that wound through pine forests. The road ended at a small clearing where a path led through the trees. It's just ahead, Richard said, leading the way. We emerged from the forest to a breathtaking vista, a crystal-clear lake stretching to distant mountains, and nestled on a small promontory. A charming 2-story house with wide windows and a wraparound porch. The boathouse Bill had mentioned sat at the water's edge, a substantial structure with boat slips below and what appeared to be living quarters above. My hands trembled slightly as I fitted the key into the lock of the main house. The door swung open to reveal an interior that was both rustic and elegant. Stone fireplace, exposed beams, comfortable furniture arranged to maximize the spectacular lake views. On the mantelpiece stood framed photographs. Our parents, Bill and me as children, family gatherings from decades past. He'd created a shrine to what we'd lost, a testament to what might have been. Upstairs, I found 2 bedrooms, one clearly intended for Bill, the other for me. My room held touches that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Books by my favorite authors, a quilt reminiscent of one our grandmother had made, wildflowers in a simple vase. He'd prepared this place for me, for us, years ago, and then waited too long to extend the invitation. He came here often, Richard said quietly, especially after his diagnosis, said it brought him peace. I walked through the rooms again, trailing my fingers over furniture my brother had chosen, imagining him here alone, perhaps looking out at the lake and thinking of reconciliation. "Would you mind leaving me here for a while?" I asked Richard. "I'd like some time alone." "Of course. I can come back tomorrow, or whenever you're ready." After Richard left, I sat on the porch, watching sunlight dance across the water. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no voices, only wind in the pines and the occasional call of a loon. I felt Bill's presence here strongly, not in any supernatural sense, but in the thoughtful details, the careful preparation for a reunion that never came. "I would have accepted," I told the empty chair beside me. "If you'd called, I would have come. Why did we wait so long?" There was no answer, of course, just the wind, the water, the enveloping peace of this place he'd created for us. I spent the night at the lake house, sleeping in the room my brother had prepared for me. In the morning, I explored the boathouse, discovering a small sailboat, fishing equipment, and above, a cozy apartment with a deck overlooking the water. By the time Richard returned the following afternoon, I'd reached a decision. "I'd like to use this place," I told him, "not just for myself, but for the women at Second Chance. A retreat center where they can heal, reflect, plan their next steps." Richard smiled. "Bill would have loved that idea." "Yes," I agreed. "I think he would." Over the next few months, I divided my time between the mansion, where Second Chance operated, and the lake house, which I transformed into a retreat center. Small groups of women came for week-long stays, time to rest, reflect, and receive specialized counseling in beautiful surroundings. Eleanor Davis, our first resident, became our first retreat participant. "This place," she said, sitting on the porch one evening, "it feels like a new beginning, like the world hasn't given up on us." "The world did give up on us," I replied. "But we haven't given up on ourselves. That's what matters." A year after I'd been found on that park bench by Richard Thompson, Second Chance had helped 27 women reclaim their lives. Some had regained financial control through legal action. Others had found new housing, new skills, new support networks. All had rediscovered their dignity and voice. On the anniversary of that fateful meeting, I organized a celebration at the lake house, a gathering of Second Chance graduates, staff, supporters, and friends. Tables were set up on the lawn sloping down to the water. Flowers and lanterns decorated the trees. A small band played gentle jazz. As twilight fell and guests mingled beneath the stars, I stood on the porch, taking in the scene. The community that had formed from individual suffering. The connections forged through shared experience and recovery. Jessica joined me, champagne flute in hand. "Look what you've created," she said, gesturing toward the gathering. "From the worst moment of your life, all this beauty." "Not just me," I acknowledged. "Bill made it possible, and Richard, and you, and every woman who was brave enough to start over. Still, it took your vision, your courage." I smiled, accepting the compliment. A year ago, I couldn't have done that. Couldn't have acknowledged my own strength without diminishing it. As the evening progressed, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the gathering, watching hesitantly. Brian. I made my way toward him. Our relationship remained complicated. Cautious coffee meetings every few weeks, carefully neutral territory, slowly rebuilding something that would never be what it was before, but might eventually be something authentic. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said as I approached. Jessica said it would be okay, but it's okay, I assured him. I'm glad you're here. Brian had changed over the past year. The desperate, haunted look was gone. He seemed steadier, more grounded. His community service at the homeless shelter had evolved into a part-time job coordinating volunteer efforts. He spoke at GA meetings about his experiences. He continued therapy. None of it erased what he'd done, but it suggested he was earnestly trying to become someone better than he had been. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, he said, gesturing toward the gathering. Second chance is changing lives. It's changing mine too, I admitted. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the celebration. Mom, Brian said finally, there's something I need to tell you. My guard went up automatically, a reflex born of betrayal. What is it? I've been offered a job in Phoenix, coordinating homeless outreach programs for a coalition of shelters. Phoenix? That's far. He nodded. I think it might be good, though. A fresh start. Chance to build something positive. He hesitated. But I wanted to ask how you felt about it. If you think we've repaired enough that I can go without it seeming like I'm running away. The question touched me. A year ago, Brian wouldn't have considered my feelings in his decisions. I think you should take it, I said after a moment. Do good work there. We'll stay in touch. You're sure? I'm sure. This past year has been about both of us rebuilding. Sometimes that's easier with a little distance. Brian nodded, relief and something like gratitude in his expression. Thank you for everything, for being willing to talk to me at all after what I did. Just be the man I raised you to be, I said, the one who got lost for a while. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to depart. I walked down to the lake's edge, watching moonlight silver the gentle waves. A year ago, I'd been homeless, hopeless, invisible. Now I stood on property I owned, surrounded by people who respected me, engaged in work that mattered deeply. The journey from that park bench to this moment hadn't been easy. The scars remained. I still kept extra food in my purse, still startled at sudden noises, still sometimes woke in the night fearing I was back on the street. But those reactions were fading. I was healing, growing stronger, becoming not who I had been before, but someone new, someone tempered by adversity but not broken by it. I thought of Bill, wishing he could see what had grown from his final gift to me. Not just the material inheritance, but the opportunity to reclaim my dignity, my purpose, my place in the world. Thank you, I whispered to the night, to my absent brother, to whatever force had allowed me to survive and rebuild. The breeze off the lake carried my words away, but their meaning remained. Gratitude for second chances, for resilience, for the discovery that even in life's darkest moments, seeds of renewal wait to germinate. The successful first year of Second Chance brought expansion. We opened a second transitional housing facility. We developed specialized counseling programs. We created a legal aid division specifically addressing elder financial abuse. Eleanor Davis, once our first resident, became our outreach coordinator. Her first-hand experience made her uniquely qualified to identify and connect with other women in crisis. I never imagined this would be my retirement career, she told me one day as we reviewed new program proposals. But it feels right, like everything I went through had a purpose after all. I understood completely. My own suffering had been transformed into something meaningful, not erased or justified, but channeled into purpose. Brian moved to Phoenix as planned. We maintained contact through monthly video calls. He thrived in his new role, eventually becoming the executive director of the Homeless Outreach Coalition. Our relationship would never return to what it had been, but it evolved into something honest. A connection between adults who acknowledged past wounds while choosing to move forward. Stephanie occasionally appeared in society pages, now married to a wealthy developer. She never contacted me again, and I was content to leave that chapter firmly closed. Richard Thompson became more than a legal representative or friend. 2 years after our first meeting, our professional relationship evolved into something deeper. At 68 and 64 respectively, we approached romance with the wisdom of experience. No illusions, no desperate needs, just genuine appreciation and companionship. "I never expected this," he admitted one evening as we sat on the lake house porch. "When I found you on that bench, fulfilling Bill's final instructions, I couldn't have imagined where it would lead." "Life's most meaningful paths are rarely the ones we plan," I replied, thinking of how my greatest loss had ultimately led to profound gains. On the 3rd anniversary of Second Chance's founding, I received a letter from Brian. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an article about the success of his homeless outreach program in Phoenix, and a handwritten note. "Mom, I wanted to share this with you. The program has helped over 200 people transition from the streets to stable housing this year. Many of them were older women, which made me think of you, of what I put you through. I know I can never fully make amends for what I did. Some wounds don't completely heal, but I want you to know that your experience, and my shame, drives my work every day. When I see an elderly woman at our shelter, I see you. I see what could have happened if Uncle Bill hadn't intervened. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm simply letting you know that the worst thing I ever did has become the foundation for the best work I've ever done. There's a symmetry there that feels like justice. With love and continuing gratitude for your willingness to maintain contact, Brian." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where I kept meaningful correspondence. Brian was right. Some wounds never fully heal. The betrayal had permanently altered our relationship, my trust, my sense of security. But healing doesn't always mean returning to an unmarked state. Sometimes it means growing around the damage, incorporating it into a new whole that is stronger, more compassionate, more aware. The Lakeside Retreat Center flourished, becoming a sacred space for women rebuilding their lives. In the boathouse apartment, I created a small museum of sorts. Photographs, letters, and artifacts telling the story of Second Chance's origins. My park bench from those homeless days, the bag I'd used to collect cans, my brother's letters. These items stood as testament to both vulnerability and resilience. Reminders that security can be lost in an instant, but also that human spirits can recover from devastating blows. As Second Chance grew, so did my understanding of what had happened to me, not just the betrayal and homelessness, but the rescue and rebuilding. All of it formed a complete narrative arc: fall, survival, rebirth. 5 years after that fateful hearing where I lost everything, I published a memoir titled Second Chance, From Park Bench to Purpose. The book became an unexpected bestseller, raising awareness about elder financial abuse and inspiring others to create similar programs across the country. Letters poured in from readers who had experienced similar betrayals or who worked with vulnerable populations. I began speaking at conferences, testifying before legislative committees, advocating for stronger protections for older adults. At one such conference, a woman approached me after my presentation. She was in her 70s,
elegant, with silver hair and bright eyes. "Your story saved my life," she said simply. "I was where you were. My daughter and son-in-law had taken everything. I was living in my car when someone gave me your book. It showed me I wasn't alone, that I could fight back. That age doesn't make me powerless." She reached for my hand. "I got my house back last month. I'm starting a support group in my community. Your courage gave me courage." Such encounters affirmed the value of sharing my story, however painful. What had happened to me, and to so many others, thrived in silence and shame. Bringing it into the light diminished its power. On the 10th anniversary of Bill's death, I held a private commemoration at the lake house. Richard joined me, as did Jessica, Eleanor, and other close friends from Second Chance. Brian flew in from Phoenix. We gathered on the dock as the sun set, sharing memories and reflections. I spoke last, releasing a small flotilla of paper lanterns onto the water, watching them drift into the gathering darkness, their lights glowing like earthbound stars. "Bill never gave up on me," I said as the lanterns floated away, "even when I had given up on myself. Even when we weren't speaking. He believed in my strength when I'd forgotten it existed." I turned to face the small gathering. "That's what Second Chance does for every woman who comes through our doors. It believes in her until she can believe in herself again." Later, alone on the porch with Richard, I reflected on the decade that had passed, the profound losses and unexpected gains, the pain and the healing, the endings and beginnings. "Are you happy, Brenda?" Richard asked, his hand warm in mine. I considered the question carefully. Happy isn't quite the right word. Fulfilled, perhaps. At peace. The journey from that courthouse to this moment had been neither linear nor easy. There had been setbacks, difficult days, moments when the past felt too present. But there had also been joy, connection, purpose. Elements of a life richly lived, not despite adversity, but partially because of it. The betrayal had broken something in me, but the breaking had created space for new growth, new understanding, new possibilities. "I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone," I continued, "but I wouldn't change where it led. How strange life is, that our worst moments can ultimately guide us to our best." Richard nodded. "Bill would be proud of what you've built." "Yes," I agreed, gazing out at the lake where moonlight now silvered the water. "I think he would." In the quiet darkness, with stars scattered like diamonds above the trees, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending. I still had work to do, connections to nurture, moments to savor, but a coming full circle. I had lost everything and found something greater. I had been betrayed and discovered deeper loyalty. I had been rendered invisible and emerged more fully seen than ever before. The path forward remained open, inviting, alive with possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. But whatever came next, I would face it with the strength I'd rediscovered, the strength that had been there all along, waiting to be awakened. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.